Well, President Trump in the Philippines today, but you know the threats and taunts from North Korea continue. The president on his final stop on his 13-day trip across Asia before he will eventually head home in a couple of days. Hello, everyone, and welcome to America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Shaw.
And I'm Marthel Neville. The president meeting with leaders at the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit. And as tensions in the region remain high over North Korea, President Trump in another war of words after North Korea's foreign ministry issued a statement calling him an, quote, old lunatic for his speech in South Korea last night, warning the North against further provocations. Mr. Trump tweeting, quote, why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short or fat? Oh, well, I try so hard to be his friend, and maybe someday that will happen. Kevin Corke is live in the Philippines. So, Kevin, what's on the agenda for the president?
Well, listen, I'm going to steer clear of the jokes about height and weight, and I'm just going to tell you economic ties really are the main focus here, aren't they, clearly. But I should also point this out. You're going to hear a great deal about the necessity for security cooperation as well during our time here in Manila. Of course, the president has just left one economic summit in APEC and now comes to ASEAN, another economic summit. And this is a major opportunity, not just for the administration, but also a major opportunity to rebuild relationship with a very important ally here in the Philippines. Now, as you know, the president comes here after an eventful trip to Vietnam, where in addition to conversations with a number of world leaders, he comes here after much discussed comments about Russian meddling, and obviously he is looking to leave that in the rearview mirror. So this gathering of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations will center on trade, security cooperation, and of course increasing the economic ties here in the region. Hosted by President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines, an outspoken critic of the U.S. government, in particular the former administration headed by Barack Obama, who chastised the Philippine leader for his human rights record. But Philippine officials tell me they're confident that the Trump administration will be able to bring a renewed spirit to the conversation between these longtime allies.
I think the impact will be on the positive side because President Trump has much more empathy. He has the same threshold and holds human rights as high as any other U.S. president. He might not, just like President Duterte, they might not say it in that manner, but it doesn't mean that they aren't strong supporters of human rights.
This is one of those circumstances, Arthel, where sometimes personality matters, and sometimes chemistry, for lack of a better description, actually matters as well. There appears to be a bit of chemistry between the two leaders. Again, the jury is still out. We've had a relatively quiet night here. The president is in for the evening. Next up, of course, a very full and busy day of meetings tomorrow. I'll be here for you, and I'll have it all right here. But for now, back to you.
And you've been doing a great job. Thank you, Kevin Corke. Eric?
Arthel, for more on this, let's bring in former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. He's a Fox News contributor, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and he's chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. Ambassador, welcome. Do you think the president has achieved his goals on this trip?
Well, I think he's achieved some of them, particularly in the security area. There's some information we don't have on the key meeting with China. Very little's been said about it. That could be because the Chinese pushed back on the president asking for a much tougher line on North Korea. It's also possible that they made some progress, but they think it's premature to put it out in public. I don't think we know yet. I just underline we don't have a lot of time to wait around to find out. North Korea very close now to being able to drop thermonuclear warheads on any target in the United States. So if China's going to help, if China's really going to exert the unique power it has to affect North Korea, needs to do it soon.
What type of progress, as you mentioned, do you think they actually may have achieved and are keeping under wraps?
Well, if there's some agreement on tightening of economic pressure on North Korea, and I don't mean by sanctions, I mean by China essentially pulling the plug on its support for the regime. Obviously, it takes time to prepare that. You don't want to give tactical warning. North Koreans obviously very worried already. It could be they've talked about other alternatives. My preferred outcome is to reunite the two Koreas. That wouldn't happen overnight. So there are a variety of possibilities. Again, I say one possibility is the Chinese said, we're doing all we can. Why don't you sit down and negotiate with them, with the North Koreans, which is a complete non-starter in my view.
A non-starter in your view. I mean, what if that was the deal and the result of the meeting?
Well, I think then the outcome is nearly certain that North Korea will get nuclear weapons, and not just North Korea, since they'll sell to anybody with hard currency, Iran, terrorist groups, other aspiring nuclear powers. That's why the resolution of the North Korea issue is so important, because the proliferation impact of North Korea visibly getting nuclear weapons around the world would be considerable.
And can China realistically, do you think, actually do something? Look, they haven't cut off the oil. They've cut off some of the coal. They haven't shut down all the banks, although they've had an edict for that. And they haven't shut down the North Korean companies completely in China. And they haven't kicked out all of the North Korean employees that kick back all that money to keep the regime going.
Yeah, let's be clear. China's played both sides of the street on the North Korea question with us for 25 years. They say they don't want the North to have nuclear weapons. They say they're going to crack down on them. They do to a certain extent. It's really kabuki theater until our attention gets diverted somewhere else, and then they go back to business as usual. For 25 years that's been going on. There's no more time for that. There's no more time for it. It's not enough to have good intentions or to let us think they have good intentions. They need to take the kind of steps China is uniquely capable of doing. Cutting off North Korea's oil supply, and they supply 90% of it. Helping make sure that Russia or Iran don't step in to pick up the pieces. These are all things China could do, and we're still waiting for evidence that they are.
Well, the president met with Vladimir Putin, and before that meeting said that he would hope that the Russian president could help on the North Korean issue. What are the chances of that?
I think pretty close to zero. I think Putin thinks North Korea is our problem. I think he doesn't think North Korea poses any threat to Russia. I think Putin has his eye on keeping these nuclear programs going in both North Korea and Iran. And, you know, even though ultimately President Trump may make a decision to use military force to destroy North Korea's programs, I don't think that would bother Putin either. I think he thinks he's in a win-win situation. He'll look cooperative and wait and see what we do.
Do you think he's in a win-win?
Yeah, look, I think as long as North Korea is out there, he sees it as a problem for the United States, Japan, South Korea, other countries in Asia. He does not see it as a problem for Russia any more than he sees the Iran nuclear program as a problem for Russia. I think China's view is the same. I think Russia and China are very closely coordinated on this, and I think they believe that for 25 years they pretty much had their way while we've stumbled around. And just to say it one more time, we're running out of time on North Korea.
Running out of time, and the clock has been ticking. Sadly, they say within a year or so, potentially they could have the capability for that intercontinental ballistic missile that could hit the U.S. That is the threat. Ambassador John Bolton, always good to see you. I know there'll be more from the Gaystone Institute this week, by the way, on all this. Thank you for spending part of your time with us on a Sunday. Of course. All right, Val.
And Eric, meanwhile, we have new video coming to Fox News from the U.S. Pacific Fleet showing 3 U.S. Navy aircraft carriers off the Korean Peninsula. The USS Ronald Reagan, Nimitz, and Theodore Roosevelt all operating together. The first time in 10 years that 3 U.S. aircraft carriers have done so. Now, the 3 ships will remain together off the peninsula for another 4 days. The USS Ronald Reagan will stay there while the others will deploy elsewhere.
Well, Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore, well, as you know, he's been speaking out this weekend against those allegations of sexual misconduct with at least one teenager, if not more. That happening, they say, decades ago. All these allegations just surfaced in that Washington Post report with the claims, and a growing number of fellow Republicans are reacting now. They're calling on Moore to drop out of the race. Jonathan Surrey is live in Gaston, Alabama, where Mr. Moore had that news conference yesterday and spoke about this. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Eric. Well, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey has no plans to reschedule the upcoming Senate election, that according to a spokesman. So Republican Roy Moore has just about a month of campaigning before he faces Democrat Doug Jones amid a backdrop of allegations of sexual impropriety. Moore's younger brother says an article in the Washington Post alleging Moore inappropriately touched a 14-year-old girl when he was 32 is politically motivated. He says the allegations are having a devastating impact on their mother.
I got a 91-year-old mother that's sitting over in the house crying right now. Crying because they accuse her son something he hadn't done.
And Roy Moore remains steadfast in his denials of the accusations, telling a crowd yesterday that the allegations are completely false. But a growing chorus of Republicans on the Hill are calling for him to step aside. On Twitter, Senators Mike Lee and Bill Cassidy called on Moore to leave the race. And this morning on NBC's Meet the Press, Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Pat Toomey said this.
I think the accusations have more credibility than the denial. I think it would be best if Roy would just step aside.
Now, here in Alabama, the allegations have fueled Moore's detractors, but they have also rallied his supporters who continue to say that their candidate is a champion of socially conservative causes. Eric?
And it is a month to the election. Thank you. All right, Jonathan.
That's right.
And for more on this, Eric, we're going to bring in now Bridget Bowman. She's politics reporter for Roll Call. And let's start right here, Bridget. With several Republican leaders speaking out against Roy Moore, do you think President Trump will call Moore and ask him to step down?
That's a really interesting question. And if he does, that will certainly likely have an impact on the race. He has said that he believes that Judge Moore would step down if the allegations are true. Will he take that a step further? That's yet to be seen. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye on that.
And if the president does or does not make the call, what's the boomerang effect for the president?
Well, in terms of obviously he's facing pressure from all of these Republican leaders at the National Party who are similarly calling on Moore to step down if the allegations are true. The real question here is what is the impact in Alabama? What are voters there thinking, and how are they going to respond to all of this news?
I want to play some sound from Roy Moore yesterday out campaigning. Let's take a listen.
These attacks involve a minor, and they're completely false and untrue about something that happened nearly 40 years ago. But more than being completely false and untrue, they're very hurtful to me personally.
And that is Roy Moore denying the allegations. Still, as you well know, Bridget, that last week the National Republican Senatorial Committee cut ties with Moore's campaign. Will his campaign donations start to dry up?
Well, we actually heard, I spoke with the campaign's general consultant, Brett Doster, on Friday. He told me that the campaign had raised over $100,000 since the Washington Post story had published. So he was arguing that they were seeing growing support, that their backers were coming to their aid. It'll be interesting to see, though, if other outside groups start to break away from Moore and if that could impact his fundraising.
And meanwhile, of course, this is the talk of the town, if you will. Not the same town, but Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland on Fox News Sunday talking about this very subject.
Look, we all know that Alabama is a very tough state politically for Democrats, but this is a special situation where we have a great candidate. On the other hand, you have a very, very flawed candidate in Roy Moore.
So Democratic opponent Doug Jones would be the first Democrat elected to the Senate in Alabama in more than 20 years. And even if Alabama voters, Bridget, couldn't stomach voting for a Democrat, they could stay home. And if, in fact, they no longer support Roy Moore, which we don't know, but how would low turnout affect that race?
Right, that's a really good point, and that's key to understanding this race. So this is a special election in December. There are no other races on the ballot. As one Republican strategist and a Democrat strategist in the state note, that Republicans don't have other races that will cause them to turn out. So that's correct. Some people are hypothesizing that Republicans who don't want to support Roy Moore would just stay home. Important to note, too, that as Senator Van Hollen noted, Democrats acknowledge that this is a tough state for Democrats to win. A couple strategists have told me that they really need a perfect storm to develop here for them to have any chance of winning the state, but they do think that one is kind of brewing at this point.
More broadly, Bridget, how might the results of this race affect GOP support from millennials and independents?
That's a very interesting question. Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how the party responds. If Judge Moore wins, there's an open question as to whether or not Senate leadership will accept him in the Senate or expel him. It'll be interesting to see kind of how they navigate that question. Judge Moore was never expected to be an ally of Senate leadership, but we'll have to see sort of how they react, especially with all of these Republican senators questioning whether he should even stay in the race at this point.
Bridget Bowman, I have to leave it there. Nice to talk to you. Take care.
Thanks, Arthel.
Yep. Eric?
Arthel, Republicans in both houses are making the final push for their tax plans, but there's some key differences between the two proposals. Coming up, we'll take a look at if the Republicans can come together to finally pass tax reform. And the survivors of the deadly Texas church shooting, while they are praying together, pausing to remember those who were killed so savagely 1 week ago today. And they're doing so at that church. It has been reopened as a memorial to those who died there.
We're going to remember those wonderful people because they care. And it's like losing your best friend.
Britain's royal family leading ceremonies today to honor the war dead of World Wars I and II in the UK's Remembrance Sunday. Prime Minister Theresa May on hand as Prince Charles laid the ceremonial wreath at the request of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Remembrance Day has been marked across the UK since the end of World War I as part of annual Armistice Day observance.
Well, meanwhile, Arthel, it is a very emotional and painful Sunday in Sutherland Springs, Texas. The site of that horrible church massacre will be reopened later tonight as a memorial. The tight-knit community is pausing to remember the victims of last Sunday's church shooting there. Survivors and members of the congregation will later be joined by hundreds of supporters to pray together for the first time since that massacre. Casey Stiegel is live right now across the street from the church in Sutherland Springs. Hi, Casey.
Hi, Eric. 7 days after this shooting at the church in this rural Texas town back here, and it is still impossible to comprehend what exactly happened inside. But the horror of 7 days ago is not preventing this community from worshiping this Sunday. I'll show you live pictures now of the First Baptist Church Sunday service, which started about 15 minutes ago. Today, they've gathered at a nearby baseball field. Clearly, because of the sensitive nature, cameras are being kept back. This is as close as they're allowing media to get. But on this rainy and gray morning in Sutherland Springs, the message, we will not be defeated. And the pastor of this church, Frank Pomeroy, says he forgives the gunman who hurt or killed almost half of his entire congregation, including his 14-year-old daughter, Annabelle.
Do you forgive the shooter?
Yes, and to be quite honest, I am more angry with the systems around than I am the shooter.
Later today, more funerals are planned. Dennis Johnson Sr. and his wife Sarah Johnson will be laid to rest. They just celebrated their 44th wedding anniversary, had 6 children, and were excited about a 4th great-grandchild soon to be born. Visitation services are also scheduled today for 16-year-old Haley Kruger. Her mother says she volunteered to help with the church breakfast that morning, and she wanted badly to become a nurse. 26 people in total lost their lives here last Sunday, making it the worst mass shooting at a house of worship in U.S. history. Eric.
Casey, when you see those faces, especially considering Pastor Pomeroy's daughter was killed, God's grace is just, he's an amazing example of that. Can't imagine their grief. Thank you. Arthel?
Thanks, Eric.
New developments in the Russia probe, why former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn may be back in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's spotlight, and what it has to do with a Muslim cleric living in the U.S. Plus, the House pushing for a crucial vote on its tax reform plan, despite some Republicans in high tax states saying they cannot vote for the measure as of now, why some key lawmakers are still confident it will pass by Thanksgiving.
I believe it will. I feel there's strong support for this. We continue to make improvements at every step of the way.
Well, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe appears to be heating up again. New reports suggest he is investigating whether former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was involved in an alleged plot to kidnap a U.S.-based Muslim cleric and turn him over to Turkey. This in exchange for millions of dollars. Garrett Tenney is live from our Washington bureau with more in this story. Hey, Garrett.
Well, Arthel, Michael Flynn has long been one of the central figures of the FBI and now the special counsel's investigation due to his business dealings and lobby work on behalf of other countries, namely Russia and Turkey. In this latest investigation, Robert Mueller's team is looking into an alleged proposal by the Turkish government to have Flynn and his son kidnap a political rival of Turkey's president living in the U.S. and then deliver him back to Turkey in exchange for $15 million, according to the Wall Street Journal. The details of that plot were also allegedly discussed both before and after the election, once at a meeting with Turkey's foreign minister in September, and then at a December meeting in New York City after Flynn had been tapped as national security advisor, which is another point of interest to investigators given the implications of a U.S. official working with a foreign government to carry out a kidnapping of a political rival. Now, Michael Flynn's attorneys, they call these new allegations outrageous and said in a statement, out of respect for the process of the various investigations regarding the 2016 campaign, we have intentionally avoided responding to every rumor or allegation raised in the media. But today's news cycle has brought allegations against General Flynn ranging from kidnapping to bribery that are so outrageous and prejudicial that we are making an exception to our usual rule. They are false. Now, Flynn's son, Michael Flynn Jr., is also a target of this latest investigation. He worked closely with his father and was allegedly part of the plot to kidnap the exiled moderate Muslim cleric Fethullah Gulen, who is living in Pennsylvania. We've been told by sources close to Michael Flynn that he is very concerned about his son's legal position in this ongoing investigation. And Turkey has also now responded to these latest reports, and they call these incredibly outrageous as well. Arthel.
Okay, Garrett Tenney, thank you. Eric?
Arthel, the Senate begins the markup or amendment process on its tax plan tomorrow. This is the House is hoping to vote on its own version of the plan by the end of the week. And right now, some say getting tax reform done, though, does not look like the slam dunk many Republican lawmakers are hoping for as they try to aim to get this all done by Christmas. Ellison Barber, live now in Washington with the tax plan's progress. Hi, Ellison.
Hi, Eric. To some people, it looks like a bit of an uphill battle, maybe not as bad as health care, but there is an optimistic outlook from House Ways and Means Chairman Kevin Brady. He says not only do they have a good tax reform plan in the House, but he says they will pass their version by Thanksgiving.
I believe it will. I feel there's strong support for this. We continue to make improvements at every step in the way, but I'll tell you what, our Republicans in the House know that it is time to deliver on this economy and grow these paychecks by getting rid of this current tax code. That's exactly what we're going to do.
This as New York Congressman Peter King lays out some significant concerns he has.
Right now, I'm definitely voting no. And what I find infuriating is when I hear people in the administration and the House and Senate leadership say that because we lost the suburbs in Virginia, in Long Island, and in New Jersey, the answer to that is to pass a tax reform bill which is going to raise their taxes.
Right now, there are two Republican tax plans, one in the Senate and one, of course, in the House. Both cut the corporate tax rate to 20%, but the Senate plan delays that cut by a year. There are 7 individual brackets in the Senate plan, 4 in the House's plan. The Senate lets homeowners deduct mortgage interest payments up to $1 million. The House cuts it in half. The Senate bill will completely eliminate the federal deduction for state and local taxes. The House bill allows deductions for property taxes up to $10,000. That was a compromise. Federal deductions for state and local taxes are a big deal for lawmakers like Congressman King, moderate Republicans in the House who are from high-tax states. Brady says the House will not accept total elimination of state and local tax deductions.
Are you saying then that the House will not accept a total elimination, that just won't fly even if the Senate passes it?
That's what I'm saying.
Now are going to change to some degree. Democrats aren't fans of either plan. In order for something to get to President Trump's desk by the Christmas deadline he set, both the House and Senate need to come together on one bill. Eric?
All right, Ellison, we'll see what they finally hammer out. Thank you. Martha?
Yeah, and as Ellison mentioned, House Republicans will have their work cut out for them this week. And for more on this, we are joined by a member of that chamber, Arizona Congressman David Schweikert. Good to see you, sir.
Happy to be here.
All right, well, let's get right to it. So the House Republicans measure, we're going to talk about that. The big sticking point, as you well know, you've heard about it, it could raise taxes through the elimination of state and local tax deductions. House Democrats saying this will mean the middle class will get the tax cut early and then a tax increase later on. Is this true?
Yeah, they're actually mixing all sorts of apples and all sorts of other fruits. First, for folks in high tax jurisdictions, we've done the calculations. They get a tax cut. They may not, and for the folks, and the second part of this is, in our model, only 6% of the population who pay taxes will itemize.
What about the middle class?
Those deductions are for only folks that itemize.
Okay, but what about the middle class? That's what, you know,
yeah, and then you have the other thing where many on the left have created some crazy calculations saying, okay, everyone agrees you get a tax cut next year, but there are some things in the tax code that will fade away a half a decade from now. And if you do all sorts of strangling of the model, you can find some folks that might have some adjustments.
Okay, but sir, I have you here, so you tell me and speak to the middle class out there asking if they are going to have their taxes increased.
Absolutely not. The middle class gets, from the absolute average family, about $1,200 to, for many of us, like in my district, it's a couple $1,000s of reduction in their taxes next year.
And then you have New York, New Jersey, states like that. What about them?
They still get a reduction in their taxes. They may not get the couple thousand that my folks here in Arizona get, but they're still going to pay lower taxes.
So you're hoping to vote on your version of this tax bill at the end of this week. Will the current draft, pardon me, of the House GOP bill be rejected by House Democrats? And if so, how do you move forward? Is there a compromise or a workaround?
Look, for a lot of my friends who are on the left, they've made it very clear they love some of the things that are in our tax reform package, but for them politically, how do they actually vote for something that would be good for the country as well as Republicans? In this sort of
But you also have some Republicans who are not in sync with your version of the bill.
But they're very few. You have a handful of Republicans who either be the unique character of their districts or those things, there's certain special interest carve-outs that they're battling for. We're trying to do something, it's great for the U.S. economy, also great for that middle-class, hard-working individual. And I think we've done that. There's going to be changes. You know, we are going to have a conference committee with the Senate and work out details. And every time we change something here, we create a cascade event in the math. So this is really difficult math, but I'm incredibly optimistic we're going to get this done this year.
Excuse me, about the Senate Republicans bill. It's claiming that it's going to provide $1.5 trillion in tax savings by cutting individual, small business, and corporate tax rates, but that corporate rate wouldn't change until 2019. Correct. Does that match your assessment of the bill? And what is it about the Senate Republicans bill that you like?
Well, first off, I'm personally really uncomfortable with delaying that corporate tax portion, because much of the modeling we've worked on is what grows the economy, what provides people increases in their paychecks and ability to save, and it's the growth in the economy. And by delaying the rolling in of that 20% corporate tax rate, we're going to slow down a bit of that economic expansion. So for some of us, that's difficult. A lot of the other things the Senate did is they did a terrific job sort of trying to hit those spending caps. Now we have to get together and mesh our two plans.
And you mentioned just how there's some, I'm not going to call it fuzzy math, but there's some tricky math here involved. How difficult, you just mentioned the word difficult, how difficult has this process of tax reform been, and where were the unforeseen or unexpected roadblocks?
Oh, it's a brilliant question, and one day I should write a book on this. It turns out some things in the tax code that are great for economic growth are not good politics. And a lot of the spending in the tax code that are great politics aren't particularly good in expanding the economy. So you're constantly engaged in this balancing act of those things that are good politics that will allow you to get the things that are great economics.
Well, because at the end of the day, it's not about politics. It's about the people and the benefit of the people, right?
And so often as Americans, you know, it's hard to say this is going to take a couple years of economic growth, but we're going to do great things for the country, because if we do not expand this country's GDP growth, we are never going to be able to keep our entitlement promises a decade and a half from now. We must dramatically increase the growth of this economy.
Congressman Schweikert, I enjoyed talking to you, and I thank you for your time on this Sunday morning, and good luck with it all.
Happy to do it. It's going to be an interesting week.
We'll be watching. Thank you.
Well, meanwhile, Arthel, there was a frightening moment at a child's birthday party. A stair suddenly collapsed, and some of those children were seriously injured. Coming up, we'll take a look at what caused that to happen. Plus, Senator Bernie Sanders, well, he's writing an op-ed in response to those revelations from former DNC Chair Donna Brazil's new book, what he is saying about what the Democratic Party should do before the next presidential election. But first, here's former Republican Governor Mike Huckabee's take.
At least 20 children and 2 adults injured at a parkour gym in San Diego when a stairway 10 feet above the ground collapsed last night during a birthday party. The children fell on several people, and officials say 4 children were treated for serious spinal injuries, while the other injuries were considered minor. No word yet on what caused the collapse.
Hillary's book was called What Happened? Donna Brazil's book should have been named What Really Happened, because that's kind of what it's all about.
Well, that's former Governor Mike Huckabee, of course. Senator Bernie Sanders has responded to those stunning and shocking revelations in Donna Brazil's new book. A lot of people talking about this. You know, the former interim DNC chairwoman writes that Hillary Clinton's campaign was pulling the strings at the DNC for nearly a year before she was the official party nominee, even though other Democrats are now pushing back against that, saying the deal actually only affected the general election race only. But in a new op-ed piece entitled How to Fix the Democratic Party, Senator Sanders writes this, quote, Donna Brazil's recent book makes it abundantly clear how important it is to bring fundamental reforms to the Democratic Party. The party cannot remain an institution largely dominated by the wealthy and inside the Beltway consultants. It must open its doors and welcome into its ranks millions of working people and young people who desperately want to be involved in determining the future of our nation. Can they do that? Well, former New York Republican Senator Al D'Amato is here. He's a Fox News contributor, and man, oh man, is he a veteran of the political world. Senator, great to see you as always.
Good to be with you.
The Democrats, they're in a pickle. The DNC's in a pickle. Do you agree with Senator Sanders?
Senator Sanders and I don't agree on that much, but on this we do. That Democratic nomination was fixed right from the start. He may have been the nominee had it not been fixed with the superdelegates, et.cetera. With Debbie Schultz there, the Congresswoman,
Schultz,
absolutely owned and operated by the Clintons, working against Bernie Sanders. There's just no doubt about it. Now, let's look forward. The process should be open. Whether it's a Republican process, the Democratic process, no one fixed the Republican nomination. I think the powers that be would have tried to keep Trump from being the guy, and they did, but they weren't successful. You need an open process. We're talking about America. We're talking about doing the right thing. So, Bernie, we agree on one thing.
Look at that. Conservative Republican former senator from New York agreeing with the former New Yorker up in Vermont, Bernie Sanders, on this. But look, we all knew with the superdelegates and the way that formulation worked. And President Trump even complained during the primaries about, you know, he would win a state, but others would get as many or more delegates.
Because of the delegates picked
Because of the delegates picked. Right. So what should they do for both parties, for the Democrats and the Republican Party, to make it an even playing field? Or were the power brokers on K Street, you know, never agree to do that?
Well, the power brokers should not be allowed to appoint a disproportionate number of representatives, you know, like former governors, former senators. So we're going to give you, if you want to limit it to a small percentage of the state's delegation so that you keep the process a democratic one, that's fine. But where you have them having an imbalance, that's wrong. So that if someone really carries the state, he or she should get the benefit of having won that. That's what America should be about.
They're going to have this Unity Reform Committee at the Democratic Party. Do you think that type of committee can actually achieve this? And do you think the Republicans should do the same thing, obviously? Will it actually get done?
Yeah. I think it will. Oh, yeah. I think that the outrage